Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you're watching us. This is Late Night Syrup, brought to you by Waffle Box. I am Mike Fish, and I am joined by my very special guest. It's Jeremy, the co-host or creator. I don't know how he likes to.
Well, I like to consider myself the boss of the
boss
Rock podcast, but yeah, and I'm super excited to be here, Mike. This is going to be fun. So thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining me. The classic guitar, or let's say classic guitar rock podcast. So what we're going to do here, what we'd like to do here on Late Night Syrup is kind of not only dive into the creative process of podcasting, but also obviously, talk about the content of the podcast. So right. We'll start with, obviously you're the host. I'm sure, did you come up with the whole concept? Did you come up with the whole idea of the classic guitar rock podcast?
Yeah, I did, and I don't know how far you want me to go back, but I was in radio from about 1986 to about 1996. So I spent about a decade in commercial radio, and I worked at, top 40 stations and country stations and classic rock stations. So I kind of worked all around, and got out, had to grow up and get a real job, in about 96.
It happens.
And it happens. But, I always have had a foot in the, classic rock. I play in a dad band, on weekends. So always have enjoyed classic rock and been kind of a classic rock nerd. And Mike, the thing about podcasting, the thing about technology, first of all, the technology has completely changed from when I got out of broadcasting.
I bet, yeah.
Night and day. I mean, when I started, we were still playing vinyl records, right?
Wow, okay.
And then CDs came in, and we thought that was the wave of the future. The great thing about CDs is they never skip. CDs skipped way more than vinyl ever did. But anyways, the advent of the internet, sorry, I get excited when I talk about this. The advent of the internet and technology over the last few decades has meant people like you and I can do a podcast, and we can reach our own audience, and we can, we're not at the mercy of, back in the day, if you wanted to work, one of my side jobs is I do voiceovers, and I've done that for about 3 or 4 years now. Back in the day, the only way you could do voiceovers, be a voiceover artist, was you had to live in a big city and have studios and thousands of dollars worth of gear. And what's the word I can use? Technology has really leveled the playing field, right? Anyone can get involved with the whole gig economy. When we talk about the gig economy, there are people, whether it's voiceovers or video editing or whatever, podcasting. And that's an exciting time, man, because anyone with an idea can do it now. And there's really, the barriers to entry are almost non-existent.
Pretty much. I mean, you go on Amazon, spend $20 on a microphone, some soundproofing if you want to go that far, and you're good to go.
Yeah. And that's exciting. So, my only regret, I started the classic guitar rock podcast at the end of 2020. Yeah. So it'll be, we're on our 42nd episode coming up, I think. So I wish I would have started 3 or 4 years, when I first started podcasting, I wish I would have started.
So, let's just dive into that a little bit, because I think the pandemic had a huge effect on the podcasting world, because I was always one of those people, same as you. Like, I always had an idea of starting a podcast for years, but it was always kind of like, I haven't got the time, and oh my God, there's so many reasons why I didn't do it. And then eventually I got lucky. I was able to continue working through the pandemic, but I worked from home. Mm-hmm. And so suddenly, because I didn't have to commute, I had so much more time on my hands. So I eventually started podcasting in, let's just say mid-2020. So when you created the classic rock guitar podcast, I'm trying to phrase this question better. Like, So did you always have the idea of, hey, I want to start a podcast, but I don't know what about necessarily? Or was it kind of like, hey, I'm psyched about classic rock. Oh, I should start a podcast about it. What was kind of the yin and the
Well,
yang? What the chicken and the egg
yeah,
first? Which came
and
first?
that's what's interesting. So I started a terrible YouTube channel back in 2014, Valentine's Day of 2014.
What a day.
I started the classic guitar rock channel on YouTube. And I mean, it's embarrassing. I mean, it's bad. Because there's no production and it's still bad. I still do it, and I just intentionally keep it low budget and crappy, right? There's a certain charm to crap, right? So I started that. So I already kind of had a little, I mean, it's not a big channel. I've got like 13,000 subscribers.
Oh, is that all? Oh my God.
Well,
Yeah.
Here's a funny story. I mean, I literally, the way it's monetized, right? You have to have at least 1,000 subscribers,
Mhm.
and, you know, the whole thing on YouTube. I had one video last year, about last May, and for whatever reason, I haven't cracked the algorithm. I don't know, but I have one video that took me from making about $85 a month. You know, the way YouTube pays out, they don't send you a check until you hit $100. So basically every 2 months I'd get a check for like $140 or something, right? And it's been that way for 3 years. I had this one video about Billy Gibbons and ZZ Top, just a little guitar lesson video thing I made. I'm up to like almost 500,000 views on that. For whatever reason, it just took off. And I mean, I had a month, I think in August, I made like $900 from one video. It's ridiculous. And I don't know the magic. Like I said, my channel's crappy. But as I was doing the channel a few years ago, I just thought, you know, I already kind of have a brand. At the time, I only had like 3,500 subscribers, right? But I was over that 1,000 subscriber threshold that I could actually be monetized. And I thought, I already like classic rock. And my original idea was just going to be guitar lessons. Well, that's a lot of work. I mean, first of all, you got to know how to play the song, and then you got to show how to play it. And then I started making these videos where I just start talking about albums that I like. And I'm getting more views on those than my guitar lesson. I'm like, well, that's a lot easier because I can ramble about the term you guys use. I can waffle on about that forever, you know, about my favorite classic rock album. So I started to do more and more of that. And it made sense. You know, about a year prior to that, for my work, I started making a podcast for my company. So now I was actually doing it as part of my job. I was the producer of our corporate podcast. So I had a little experience with doing podcasting, and I thought, okay, now's the time. And so I think November of 2020 is when we did our first episode, and it just made sense to do it. And slowly but surely we started building up an audience, and I call it classic guitar rock instead of just classic rock, because my focus is always kind of guitar driven rock, which may or may not be considered classic rock, you know, but the focus is usually music where the guitar is pretty prominent. We focus on the 60s, 70s, and 80s is kind of our sweet spot. And that's not to say we don't talk about some 90s stuff or new stuff even, but that's really kind of our focus. So it was kind of a natural thing to transition from my low budget YouTube channel into the podcast.
See, it's all in my name. So, because I was always, I know. Also, by the way, I'm getting a little bit. Am I coming through your speakers or your headphones? Because I'm getting a little bit of feedback on my end.
I'm just hearing you through my headphones. Are you getting echo from me?
I'm getting my sound coming back to me, which is weird.
Okay, well, I don't know if that's something on my end, or let me try something here. I turned my headphones down. Did that help?
Let's see. I mean, that sounds better. Okay, anyway, let's just roll with it anyway. Just roll with it. So because I was always growing up, for whatever reason, I don't know what it was, but I was like always fascinated by the drummers in the bands, because I always looked at that as kind of like I always compare drummers to potatoes in a meal. Because
Yeah,
like if they're there, sure, that's cool, that's nice. But when they're missing, like, oh my god, where's the potatoes?
absolutely.
So
That's
it's
a good
like
analogy.
if you take away the drummer, it's like all of a sudden it's like, what the hell? Where's this whole thing going? So I was always like fascinated by the drumming and drum line of the song. So it's interesting to see someone who's like guitarist. So was you? I mean, back in the day before we kind of get into modern day stuff now, like was
Mhm.
you in a band yourself? Like, what was your music background other than the radio?
Yeah, so I I started playing. I got my first guitar when I was like 10 years old, tinkered around a little bit. It wasn't really until I got an electric guitar. So this would be around 1980, 81. I traded an old motorcycle for a guitar. And from that point, I started learning. So this is early 80s. And, I was I was always interested in music, and I tried violin, I played trumpet, I took piano lessons, and I just never really got into those. But the guitar stuck. And I probably because of the cool factor, right? It's a lot cooler to play a guitar. So, yeah, throughout high school, I played in bands and have just always kind of played in little side band, small time, just for fun, but make a few bucks playing here and there, and that was kind of my thing, and I was fascinated with radio, and from the time I was a kid, I loved the idea of radio and broadcasting, and so that was kind of the interest, and this, there's a good match between broadcasting and music, and I find a lot of people that are in broadcasting are also into music, so
Right.
that just is a fairly common thing. But that was the thing, is I loved both, and has just always been a passion of mine, and as I mentioned, in 90s I got out of radio, and had to get a real job. I've always kind of missed that element. So the podcasting is a great way to kind of scratch that broadcasting itch. And we're lucky enough to live in a time when we can do that. So
Right. I mean, last thing on the podcast before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of the music. So, when you're producing your podcast, I always like to ask this question: It's like, how intricate are you with the polishing of the podcast as such? Like, because for me personally, when we produce Waffle Box,
mhm.
it's literally we hit record, we do the podcast, we end record. I obviously maybe take off a little bit from the beginning, a little bit at the end, but it's like, hey, what you see is what you get. This is what
Right.
if there's mistakes, whatever. That's almost the charm of it, I like to think. But obviously, I know some people do like to edit it to make it more professional. So how do you approach the podcasting side of things?
So I think in terms of the actual conversation, it's pretty much like you said. We don't do a whole lot. We go in, it's a conversation. I'll go through and edit out if there's long pauses or whatever.
Right.
I might go in and edit some of that out. Where I spend most of my time is in and again, being a fan of radio, I like to create like the old sweepers that you'd hear on the radio station, the best rock, all that kind of crap. So I waste all my time there. It's making those little sweepers. So coming in and out of commercials, I'll play those like you're listening to a radio station back in the 70s or 80s, right? I'm a terrible, time waster on goofy stuff like that. So I'll spend time. What I've done lately is I make these little montages and I notice you guys have a great starting for your podcast also, where you play some clips and audio drops and things. And I like to do that. So
we used to, but shout out now, our intro is very smaller and it's voiced by a man named Jeremy from the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's fun to do. I love doing those. I love to just geek out and do that kind of stuff. And that's where I waste most of my time. right? It's putting together the little audio elements
Mm-hmm.
that, to be honest, most people don't notice. My co-host was like, yeah, do those things need to be that long? And so my thing is, hey, I'm aimed at 80% of my audience are Gen X males. Okay, that's my audience. They're guys like me that are old and remember this stuff. And so I have a method to my madness. I pick all these audio drops from shows or movies that anyone my age, within 10 years either side of my age, is going to recognize, right? And so my co-host John, based on what his wife said, well, man, those are awful long at the beginning. And I said, John, you didn't even notice. I mean, the artistic excellence. I mean, my audio drop ended right when that song I was using stopped. I mean, it was perfectly, no one else would notice that but me, right? But to me, that's the challenge. Is I'll take a theme song, the Johnny Quest theme song. Anyone my age remembers watching Johnny Quest. So I use that Johnny Quest theme song and put audio drops from the 70s and 80s throughout it. And it ends right when the song ends on the last beat. It's flawless. Of course, no one thinks so or notices but me. But that's the kind of thing I fixate on. And that's the part that I think is fun, even though maybe no one else even cares. But I try and that's where I waste most of my time. The actual conversation, we don't do much there, edit much, because I think, like you said, that's part of the charm. Is it's a conversation. You don't want it to be scripted or anything like that.
Well, I think also at the end of the day, I think when you're podcasting, especially in a quote unquote independent podcaster, you can promote as much as you want. You can use social media as much as you want. But I think at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do in terms of trying to get people to listen. And so in my mind, say, even if I only get a handful of listeners or 100 listeners, whatever, I want to put out something that I'm proud of. I would listen to. So yeah, like those little things, I'm happy to do them, even though most people won't listen. As long as I'm proud of the content I'm going to put out, I don't care at the end of the day how many people listen. As long as I'm happy with what we put out, that's where I'm at right now. So it is.
And you know what? I think that's a key right there. I think if someone starts a podcast with the intention of making money,
they're going to get upset very quickly.
Yeah. I because you have to be excited about it. And I assumed going in, no one's going to listen to this, right? So it has been pleasantly surprising. And I mean, we're not a massive podcast by any means, but we have a growing regular audience that actually sends us emails and slowly but surely. That's why I wish I would have started 3 years ago.
Right. Because then who knows where you'll be at now.
Exactly. So.
But no, I'm saying, like, whenever I check my stats and like one episode, even if it's like 60 people listen to this, I'm like, oh shit, like what the fuck? Like that's amazing.
People, yeah, totally.
All right, so we've talked about the ins and outs of the podcasting world. Right, next we're going to talk about the content, the classic rock. We're going to talk about some rock music right now. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick commercial break because I'm a working man, got to pay those bills. So we'll be right back after this quick break. Hey, you. Yes, you. Was you thinking of having that beer? But my friend, it's only 10 a.m. Won't everyone judge you for drinking this early? Well, don't worry, we've got just the thing to help you. Your very own Waffle Box mug. And now, everyone will just think you're drinking coffee, so you can enjoy your morning beer judgment-free. Go to wafflemerch.com to get yours today. Fantastic acting there. Fantastic.
That was an awesome ad. Seriously. And I told Mike when we started that we have not made the leap to live streaming, and so I'm looking at this as educational. So you should bill me, Mike. You should send me a bill for consulting fees. That was awesome. That was really cool.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I try.
That's great.
I don't have the mug. I have my I have my. I don't know if you're into football. My Brian DeBoll mug.
There you go. Nice.
Go Giants. Anyway, so let's just talk about music now. So one of the things I was thinking about, which is I thought was quite interesting, because you talk about classic rock, which on paper you would think classic rock is classic to whomever is listening.
Exactly.
Right. But then I was kind of when I was trying to think, well, what's classic rock to me? But almost has classic rock itself become a genre? Because when I think of what classic rock is to me, I'm an 80s child. So classic rock to me is kind of like, like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, and things like that. That's put into grunge, and then it's like, everything's put into like a little box. So almost has classic rock, no matter how old you are, become a genre where you think of classic rock is like Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and things like that. How do you view that?
So that's the age-old debate right there. And I'll tell you the way. I'll just say, here's my definition. And this is, people want to fight me in the parking lot when I say this, right? And it's, to your point, it's completely subjective. It's completely subjective. So to me, if I had to come up with a definition of classic rock, to me, it's like 1966 to about 1990. I mean, that's kind of if you're defining classic rock. But see, I hedge my bet a little bit. I call it classic guitar rock, again, because it's the guitar driven stuff. So there's classic rock music that isn't really what I call guitar music, that I don't really talk about, or that's not what I focus on. Now, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, are they classic rock? That's the age-old debate. Some people would say absolutely Pearl Jam and Nirvana and grunge is classic rock. But then you got some people that are so purist that they would say, like hair band music, from the 80s, they would say, oh, Bon Jovi's not classic rock, Motley Crue's not classic rock, where to me, I think it is, right? And so I talk about that. And again, I know it's very maybe egocentric on my part, but I focus on the stuff that I like. And then, sometimes people will say, yeah, well, you guys need to talk about Pearl Jam. And there's no logic to my, like, I love Foo Fighters, and they're the 90s. And yet I'm not a huge grunge fan, so that's the interesting part.
I mean, Foo Fighters is a conversation of itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they've been relevant for now 25 years, but everyone thinks of Dave Grohl, Nirvana.
Exactly.
But he's been doing Foo Fighters like 3-4 times as long as he was in Nirvana.
And I don't want to be blasphemous when I say this. I think Foo Fighters are way better than Nirvana. That's my personal opinion. I know. That's a hot take there. But
I have a story about Nirvana I'll get to in a minute. But anyway.
But that's part of the fun, right? That's part of the fun is even my original co-host, a gentleman named Jeff, great guy. My current co-host, a guy named John, and the reason we made the change from Jeff to John.
You like Jays. That's
I like Jays. That's the theme. So John is local. So John is a friend of mine that we've played together a lot, and it would just, for what we want to do, having someone local was just going to work a little better. And Jeff's life was really busy and it was a little tough. So that's the only reason we made the change. So I only say that if you go back and listen to our episodes, the first 15 or 16 is this guy, Jeff. He lived in Colorado. I'm in Washington State, by the way. And then, we
So you're
switched to
like,
jazz.
it's
Yeah.
we're late night syrup. This is like early afternoon for you.
Yeah, it's 6:26 my time. Yeah, it's easy for me. This is perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So the story I have about Nirvana. So growing up, for me, I was very, what's the word? Sheltered as a child musically, I guess, but in a good way. Like I look back now, I'm thinking because I was very brought up in the '80s music and things like that. But me growing up, I was like, this is the music. So Spice Girls. Do you remember Spice Girls? I remember I had my parents bought me all their albums. I had all the Spice Girls albums, but it wasn't until like early 2000s where I finally got introduced to music of my time. I remember a friend of mine said, "Hey, you should check out this Nirvana album," and he let me In Utero, which
Yeah.
was technically their third album.
I think they're third. Yeah.
Not many people remember Bleach, but In Utero was
Right.
like, and so I listened to it. I had no idea of this band, and I was like, "Holy shit, this is amazing!" And so I went and just bought their back catalog. I bought as much as I could, and then one day I found out, oh, the reason they haven't come out with anything recently is because Kurt Cobain's dead. Oh, that's annoying.
Yeah.
So anyway, one day I was watching MTV2 in the UK. This is when I lived in the UK, and they had Nirvana Unplugged show. They were showing that, and it turned out it was going to be an unplugged. What's it called when they marathon?
Right. Right.
And so I watched the Nirvana show. So, that's fantastic. And then following that, they had Alice in Chains Unplugged. And so I was like, oh, I watched that. And I was like, again, blown away. I was like, oh my God, this band's incredible. And so I started doing research on them. I was like, oh, he's dead as well. Jesus Christ. Fuck.
Yeah.
So very quickly, all my favorite bands, their lead singer probably died about 5 years before I got into them. But so I was very, it was like happy because I discovered them, but also sad. Like, what you see is what you get. Like what you see is what you get. You're not going to get anything new. But,
Right.
Well, Alice in Chains technically puts a new, but we're not going to get into that because not my Alice in Chains anyway.
And what's funny, Mike, is maybe funny is not the right word, but a common theme, at least in the music we talk about, because we're talking a lot about 70s music and 80s music, and even sometimes late 60s music. The reality is most of these artists are in their 70s now. So, if you're talking about a Deep Purple or, Richie Blackmore or whatever, it's these guys are old. And so
I mean, the classic ones, Rolling Stones. How the hell are they all alive?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable. And the reality is some of them probably should have stopped. But a lot
Why
of
is
them
that guy from AC/DC still wearing a schoolboy suit? Like, what
exactly. Yeah. And so Sammy Hagar, 75 years old. He's a perfect example. 75 years old. He's kind of the exception because he can still sing. But a lot of these guys, all they've ever done, and that's a kind of a common theme is dealing with the mortality of these classic rock icons. There's only 2 Beatles left, right? I'm representing with my Beatles shirt here tonight. Only 2 of the Beatles are left. And sadly, more and more of these classic rock icons, they won't be around much longer. So
it's always a depressing thought when you think like, oh, what from my youth and your youth, like, could you imagine like what the music industry would be like if a Kurt Cobain was still alive, if a John Lennon was still alive? Like, oh my God, the music John Lennon would have been putting out now. Who knows? Well, maybe he would have given up by now, but yeah.
Jimi Hendrix, and you could dedicate a whole show to the whole what they call the 27 Club, right? There are so many phenomenal artists that all died at the age of 27. Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Amy Winehouse. I mean, it goes on and on. They were all 27 years old. I don't know what it is about 27, but if you
I have a thing about Amy Winehouse, by the way.
Well, she was just phenomenal.
Oh, she was. But what I have to be always quote unquote that guy because I don't know where it is about you, like around your neck of the woods, but
Mhm.
around here and whatever. So my wife is huge into Amy Winehouse, but I guess her biggest song, because they always play it, was Valerie.
Mm.
And I always have to be that guy. That's a cover, by the way. That's
Yeah,
technically not
yeah.
her song. Well,
Just so you know.
just
Yeah.
so you know.
But to your point, imagine what we've missed out on.
Mm.
I think Buddy Holly might have been 27 too.
I
I'm not sure.
Do you know?
But
I don't think he was. I think he might have been younger than that, to be honest.
could be.
But I don't know what it was, because obviously I was born in '85, so that was way before my time. But I don't know what it was. But I heard a Buddy Holly album. I think maybe my dad. I was hooked. Like, his music was fantastic,
Very,
so good.
and you just stuck a dagger right through my heart when you said you were born in 85. That's the year I graduated from high school.
Oh shit!
So
Sorry.
now I feel, oh man, now I feel really old.
Anyway, thanks for joining us. That's the end of tonight's show.
But that is such and I think something that people talk about so much is, what would we have gotten from John Lennon, or from, Buddy Holly or Jimi Hendrix, or for metalheads, Randy Rhoads, any of these people that died too young.
Was it Dimebag from Pantera?
Dimebag, and of course he went in such a terrible way.
Horrible way, yeah.
It's really sad. It's really sad to think of what did we miss out on? What did we miss out on? So, anyways, and that's part of our mandate with the podcast, is we want to remember this great music, without trying to sound too much like, well, when I was a kid, we didn't have this crap you guys have, because, and here's the thing I find, Mike, this is funny. In the 80s, okay, when you were just
a wee tot,
right? I was a total metalhead. I mean, it was Iron Maiden, it was Judas Priest, it was Ozzy Osbourne. That was the thing. And what I've found is, as I go back and listen to the music that I heard just on the radio, mainstream music, it was so good. And I know I sound like that guy, that old guy.
Yeah.
It was so much better. But you know what? I've been spending the last few days listening to the brand new Tears for Fears album. And of course, I've gone back and listened to all their back catalog. And when I was in high school, I would never have admitted I liked Tears for Fears or Duran.
They put out some great tunes.
Oh man, they're phenomenal. Duran. I love Duran. I couldn't admit that when I was a metalhead in high school. My friends would have beat me up, right? But so much of that music was so good. And that's not to say that there's not good music now. It's just that I don't take the time to listen to it like I should.
I think the problem is, I mean, we've got circling back to our beginning conversation where we were talking about how easy it is now for people to get into podcasting. I think with now technology, I think it's so much easier for musicians to get their name out there that it's just a numbers game. Of course, because there's so much out there, just law of averages, there's going to be some great stuff, but there's also going to be some really bad stuff coming out there.
Yeah. And there, it's a double-edged sword, right? Billie Eilish, okay? Mm-hmm. Billie Eilish and her brother in their bedroom created an album that was a massive platinum Grammy-winning album, phenomenal album that would have been impossible 15 years ago, 20 years ago.
No.
But that's the nature of technology, And to your point, the barriers to entry, they're not there anymore. So anyone that wants to, whether it's a podcast or whether it's music, anyone that wants to publish can do it. So that's the upside. That's the upside. The downside is
anyone can publish this stuff.
Anyone can publish, and some of it is crap. But that's good, right? Let the marketplace.
Exactly, yeah.
The cream will rise to the top. But for the musicians, and you'll hear this, right? Remember, this might be a little before your time, but the whole Metallica, I can't even remember the website, Napster, right? The whole
Yep.
Metallica
I remember Napster
thing. the music business is just different now, and people don't buy albums like they used to. They stream it, right? They
Yeah.
stream music, and because of that, it changes the whole revenue opportunity for artists, because they will tell you, we don't make anything from Spotify. We make, so it's different. The whole model's different than it was in the 70s and 80s when record companies would spend millions of dollars producing an album, and they might give you 4 or 5 shots at making an album before they dump you. And that just doesn't exist anymore. Doesn't exist. If you don't have a hit right out of the gate,
you're right.
They drop you like a hot potato. Yep, totally.
Yeah, I mean, maybe because I always get annoyed that because whoever decides how it all works, I get lumped into millennial because I get apparently millennials are 85 to whatever. So I was anyone who grew up and was introduced to this is a computer and oh my god, I have to dial up, blah, 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 blah. Like I grew up without internet and then I learnt what the internet was. I don't think I'm a millennial, but anyway, that's my issue. But yeah, I think because I'm in that middle ground, like you say, no one buys physical stuff anymore. But I'm in that middle ground now where because I'm on both sides of I don't know what the fuck I was saying, but I almost use Spotify and that kind of thing as almost like a testing ground.
Yeah.
Of like, oh my god, if I really like this album, I still want to buy the physical copy. Like,
I'm the same way. Yeah.
Like this album's earned my respect. I'm gonna buy it. Like that kind of weird thing.
Yep.
So that's what I'm getting into now, because I still weirdly I like to hold this. I want to see the art. I want to see the booklet that comes with it.
Mm-hmm. The record was an experience, right?
Vinyl's coming way back now.
And I've hopped back on that bandwagon. I've pulled out all my records. I bought a turntable about 2 years ago. And now it's like I go to there's used record stores popping up,
Well, even the new Adele record, my wife pre-ordered the vinyl for that.
Yeah. And I think it's fun because, totally, you would go to the record store and you'd look at this big, beautiful album, gatefold. Usually you could fold out and look at the inside. It was really cool. And it was a tactile experience because you physically pulled this big vinyl disc out, you set it on the turntable, you set the needle down, and you heard that. You listen to it, you have to turn it over. It's kind of a pain actually now, but at the time that's all you had, right? And you'd sit and you'd look at the big album cover, and so now when you just download one song or whatever, to me you lose out on some of that experience. And I know I sound like an old fossil when I say that, but that's just the way I like to listen to music.
I think also on a deeper level, I think on a therapeutic level,
yeah,
just like getting no matter what's happening in your life right now, it feels like you're disconnecting from the modern world in a weird way. So it's like it's nice I'm going to come home and I grab a drink and I'm going to put on a vinyl record.
Yep.
And it's almost like I'm away from everything now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just so peaceful in a weird way. No matter what genre of music you listen to, you got your vinyl record going.
Yeah, that's exactly
it's nice.
what it is. I have, and I bought a turntable.
And sorry, don't jump in, but Nadog 833 live on our Twitch channel. The album art was a thing to behold. It's exciting to have not only the music, but you almost had a piece of art with you as well.
And that's really what it was. It was, they called it album art. It was art, and think about from a cultural standpoint, you think of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Everyone has seen that album cover,
Well, it's nothing special, but it's iconic.
No, it's like everyone has seen it. Even something simple, AC/DC Back in Black, right? It's a black album cover, but it's such a just a part of our culture. And what cracks me up now is when you see people wearing a shirt with the band that, you know, they've never listened to a single song that band has ever done. But the whole, whether it's album art or logos or whatever, it's just become so much of our culture that you can't get away from it.
Are you familiar with the comedian Kevin Hart?
I am. Mm-hmm.
So he, on one of his stamps, he has like a little catchphrase, and I stole that catchphrase because I remember. So my wife's cousin, she was at this time, let's just say 13 years old, and we're at the house having a family thing, and she comes out, she's wearing a Nirvana t-shirt, and I said to her, "Oh, cool t-shirt. Like, do you like Nirvana?" She was like, "Oh, I don't know." No, she didn't know anything about Nirvana. Yeah. And I did that. I came out, "Well, you're gonna learn today," and I just schooled her for like 30 minutes. This is Nirvana, and I was playing her songs like this. It's so much fun. Anyway, but I talking about where we were talking about off air, where you have obviously familiarization with the professional wrestling world.
Oh,
I would almost say before we can get into that, but almost like the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon album cover is almost of the music world of Hulk Hogan, because it's like, even if you don't know much about wrestling, you know Hulk Hogan.
Absolutely.
You might not know about music, but you know the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon cover.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor. Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I checked out your pilot episode, and you guys were talking about.
Don't do that. By the way, anyone listening, don't bother. don't do that.
Whatever you do. No, it's great. It's great. That's one of the cool things, by the way, Mike, is you can go back and listen. Clearly, it's the case on our podcast, and you see growth and development. You know, you see an arc. And I think that's kind of interesting. I love to go back and see where maybe it's a little rougher around the edges in the early days, which I think that's cool. That's what makes it, I think, more genuine. But yeah, when you guys mentioned we're talking about pro wrestling and that, I was like, oh, I'm a fan. I've subscribed, and I'll be listening to all your episodes. And some of the movies you mentioned, you know, I saw that movie. Yeah, it was great.
Kush does love a good movie review.
Yeah, I really liked it. But my exposure to, I was an Army brat, so kind of moved around. Spent a lot of time in Oklahoma. And so my introduction to pro wrestling, it was this is mid 70s. So this is pre WWF, WWE.
Well, if we're using WWF, WWE as a reference, this is probably WWF, Worldwide Wrestling.
Yeah. So here's the thing.
Vince McMahon Sr. was probably still in charge at this point.
We would watch world-class championship wrestling out of Dallas, Texas, right? The Von Erichs.
Was that Texas? Yes.
Yeah, WCCW. World-class championship wrestling. That was
when, sorry, I didn't jump in. That was when, because obviously to try to put a reference point to WWF, there was the Texas Tornado.
Was Kerry Von Erich. Yeah.
But this has been like his dad.
Yep.
Still.
When we started, it was Fritz Von Erich.
Mm-hmm.
And which is funny, because if you go back and look at the history, their real name is Atkins, right? They're Texas people. They've grown up in Texas their whole lives. He's never set foot in Germany.
Doesn't sell Atkins.
But when Fritz started, he was a heel. And his whole shtick was he was a Nazi. So you watch videos from the 60s of Fritz Von Erich, and he would march out. It was bad. I mean, it was like, you could never do that. But that was his whole shtick. He was a Nazi, right?
Who'd have known his son would be one of the biggest baby faces.
Exactly.
In the industry.
And he was just somewhere in there. I missed, I just gone back and researched the Von Erichs, which is a very tragic story, actually.
It's an incredibly tragic story.
But by the time we were watching in 75, 76, Fritz Von Erich and Bruiser Brody, man, Fritz and the Iron Sheik, these were some big rivalries. The Iron Claw, that was his whole thing. And then we watched that whole transition when his sons David and Kevin and Carrie and Michael, and there was a whole slew of them. But yeah, then when we got cable, well, I guess we were watching that on cable, but then we started getting WTBS. So WTBS, then we were seeing world class WCW from I think that was out of Atlanta. I don't remember, but then we're seeing people like Roddy Piper, and the Freebirds, and all of these. So it was the good old days, and then of course it was like a mid to late '80s when you saw WWF and Hulk Hogan,
the Rock and Wrestling.
Oh yeah, and then it just became, it exploded. It was a big deal then.
Almost to connect the two we're talking about, the Freebirds, they were the first ones to bring music into wrestling with Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Totally. Yes. Good. Yeah. Absolutely. Michael Hayes even had an album at one point.
Oh, I bet he did.
Yeah. And
I haven't listened to it, but just by seeing the kind of person he is, I bet he definitely had an album out. Yeah. Like, he loves himself.
I bet it was really bad too.
Oh,
but
sure it was.
They would actually play that as their walk, as their walk on. They were playing this song that Michael Hayes had on his album. But oh man, and I even in person, okay, I would go. This is when it was still small enough that World Class Championship Wrestling would send guys around, and they'd go to these podunk towns across Oklahoma and Texas, and you could go see them. And I saw King Kong Bundy and Von Erichs, the Great Kabuki. So all these acts that never quite made it over to the big time with Vince McMahon, other than like Kerry, the Texas Tornado. But there were a lot of these regional stars. Harley Race. I saw Harley Race wrestle, I think, Kevin Von Erich in person, but all these old Southern fat guys, there's a transition, right? In the good old days, man, they were just fat guys. And then all of a sudden when WWF came, then you get the good looking buff guy. There were still some fat guys, Honky Tonk Man and some of these guys, but it was a completely different when it was a bunch of hillbilly rednecks in the 70s. And you're like, dude, could you lift weights or something? You're just a fat guy, right? But that's the way wrestling was. And it was awesome.
The most heartbreaking situation where I traveled to Orlando, Florida to watch WrestleMania 24, I think it was. And it was supposed to be Ric Flair's last ever wrestling match. And I remember being there, and I remember being like so emotional, like, oh my God. Like, not only am I seeing it, but this is like history in the making. I'm at Ric Flair's final match. And then he fucking realized, oh, actually, I like money. And so he just wrestled so many times afterwards. Like, oh, it ruined that for me. But it was pretty cool.
I'm sure you've watched it, the Ric Flair ESPN documentary.
So good.
Oh, really, really good. And Ric Flair, he was the one too.
Ric Flair can get away with so much. The fact that he can sit next to his wife and tell stories about how he cheated on this woman. Oh, yeah. And she's like, ha, 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 ha. Yeah, Rick, you're so crazy.
It's amazing. So you guys have probably watched this, but man, one of the best dives you can do, if you got nothing better to do late at night, go on YouTube and watch the whole Andy Kaufman, Jerry Lawler thing. That
is classic.
It's brilliant on so many levels. Andy Kaufman was like he was a genius.
Well, because they say kayfabe, quote, they say kayfabe, which is like what they say of how the realism or believism, I guess. But even back then, people thought enough that, oh, we get what wrestling is, but this Andy Kaufman stuff, that's real. Like, exactly. he sold it so well. He
sold it, and
I don't know why. Like, I don't know how much you follow it now. I apologize if I keep interrupting you, but they still had the WWE Hall of Fame and things like that. If they're recognizing wrestling as a whole, how Andy Kaufman is not in the Hall of Fame is ridiculous. Like, he's a wrestling icon. If you look at it,
he totally is. And we always talk about Kaufman, but Jerry Lawler was every bit as brilliant in that whole thing as Andy Kaufman.
He sold it so well.
I mean, he sold it, and even like the appearances. There's the when they're both on Letterman and Lawler hits Kaufman in that episode where he's there. I
Slaps him right in the face.
Slaps him right in the, and even Dave is like,
"Oh shit,
holy crap!" And of course, Lawler and Andy, they've got all this worked out. You know, this is all part of the.
They're like best friends at that point, I think.
Yeah. And I thought, here's how good Lawler was at selling it. When Andy Kaufman died, which was tragic, even as, and they were friends. That's the thing.
Yeah.
When Lawler's talking about it, he's like, well, you know, I don't wish anyone to die, but you know, even as he's like talking about his death, he's still
selling the angle.
And I'm like, wow, this guy is. And to watch Kaufman in the ring just making fun of all these fans, that's the best thing in the world. I've spent so much time watching the Andy Kaufman, Jerry Lawler things. It's brilliant. I mean, it's brilliant.
Genius at work. Absolutely genius at work.
Yeah.
Let's see. Now I'm wondering where do we go to?
Sorry, I'm getting y'all off
music into wrestling.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. All right. So real quick. Okay. So, I want to talk about more about wrestling now, but now, but the music side of things. So, do you, in terms of, are you like me a little bit, where you kind of stuck in your ways, or do you still try to get into new music, or have you now found like, this is where I'm at this point. This is my music.
I wouldn't say I'm so rigid that I won't listen to new stuff. In fact, John, my new co-host, has been good for me about that, because, you know, before I was hardline. It would be, hey, if it came out after 89, I don't even want to talk about it. Yeah, I'm like, that was kind of that's the cutoff. But that's not good, because I'm missing out on some good music, right? And so in terms of the podcast, I always have myself an out, and I could say, hey, it's guitar rock, right? This is guitar music. So I'm okay talking about. And here's the other thing, and you said this earlier, that classic rock is a genre. Well, there's new music coming out that people call classic rock, right? It's because it's in the same vein, melodic rock. Sometimes people call it melodic rock, right? But and there are record labels, one in particular called Frontiers, that's dedicated to new music by either old bands, okay, that are putting out new music that radio won't play anymore, or it's new bands that kind of have that classic rock style. So again, because of streaming, if you want that type of music, it's there. And it's easy to find, and you go stream it. So from that standpoint, if you're a fan of classic rock or classic rock style music, there's lots of it out there, because people will always complain, well, they won't play a new Blue Oyster Cult song on the radio. No, they won't, but you can stream it. They're still putting out new music. Cheap Trick has never stopped putting out albums, and they still put out good albums. You just got to know where to find it and listen to it. But that's not to say there's not good new music coming out as well. So I'm trying to be a little more open-minded about some of the new stuff too.
I remember what changed my dad's world. So I remember back when I lived in England, he was very much of like, oh, all the modern day music is trash and yada 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 yada. But he was like so old school. Like, I introduced him to the Pixies. And I was huge. One thing, because I remember there's one point in a Pixies documentary I was watching, which really like sold me on like, okay, I like the music, but now I'm in love with this band. Where they were recording either their first or second album. I can't remember what it was, but the producer was mad that their songs were too short, and so Frank Black dragged him to a record store and took him to a Buddy Holly album. It's like, look at how long these songs are. Like,
minute 50. Yeah.
shut the fuck up. Like, this is.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
was like, oh my god, like he loves Buddy Holly. Oh my god. So I just kind of fell in love with it. But I remember watching a documentary, and I watched it with my dad. I was like, oh, you like documentaries, so I tricked him into watching this. But it was a Pixies documentary, and David Bowie was on it. And David Bowie was like, for me, other than, I think it was Sonic Youth, the Pixies are the best thing to come out of the 80s.
Wow.
And so my dad, just watching David Bowie almost give this whole, no, Pixies, you need to check these out. My dad was saying that, oh my god, I need to check out more music. And weirdly enough, my dad from that eventually became like a huge Green Day fan. Like, what the fuck was that? It was so bizarre because that opened his world. Like, oh my god, I need to expand my horizons because David Bowie told me so. It was hilarious.
I was such a purist, right? When I started with this, well, we're not technically playing together, but I started playing in a band about 6 years ago. And I had to actually learn. To me, it was new music, but it's like from the 90s, right? But to me, it was, so I'm learning Matchbox 20 songs. I'm learning Green Day songs. I'm learning, all these 90s bands. And I'm like, I like this. I like this stuff. I've been missing a lot of Coldplay songs. We were learning some Coldplay songs. And I like.
Did you ever get into Finger 11? Finger 11 were a big band that I got into, and who would come out in like 2000s ish.
I'm not familiar with them, but I'm going to check them out now. If and that's the thing I get exposed to this stuff that I like, and then I'm like, oh well, I'll probably like other stuff, So that's been helpful for me, is playing with some guys that were a little younger than me that had different musical backgrounds or tastes than I did, and I realized I do like a lot of this newer stuff. So that's been a good thing for me. I have to tell you one funny radio story.
Go for it. I love it.
And you said Buddy Holly, short songs, right? So in the 50s and 60s, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. That's how long songs were. Maybe they'd stretch them out to 250, right? But short songs. That's the way they did it. So massive song that came out as a country song, Marty Robbins' song El Paso. Out in the West Texas town of El Paso. I mean, it's a cheesy song. My grandparents listened to it, right? It's probably late 50s, early 60s. This song was 4 minutes and 50 seconds long.
Oh, shit.
And they're like,
that's like November Rain in them times.
Yeah. They're like, no, there's no way radio stations are going to play this song. So they printed on the label. So the label that they sent out to all the stations, they said it was 2 minutes and 50 seconds long. It was 4 minutes and 50 seconds long. They lied.
Genius.
And they sent it out, and stations played it. And once it was a hit, it didn't matter how long it was, right? But the first pressings, the first release of that 45 that they sent out to the stations all said it was like 250, and it was actually 450. But they just lied. That's one of my favorite stories, because back then, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. That's how long songs were,
My similar to that. I mean, my favorite story is, it's more of a UK. I think it's more well known now, but it was in the British folklore, I guess, was when Queen were coming out with Bohemian Rhapsody, and the record label were kind of, this song is, one, it's too operatic, like what the hell, like, but also this is way too long. I think it was like almost 7 minutes long or something.
Oh, yeah, yep.
But then Freddie Mercury knew a guy called Kenny Everett, who was at the time. So I was introduced to Kenny Everett in the 80s, 90s as a comedian, but he was like a huge radio host on the BBC. I think it was BBC radio he had. But he was friends with Kenny Everett, and so Kenny Everett was, all right, I'll play it. And he played Bohemian Rhapsody on repeat, and he locked the studio door so no one could come in and stop him. And he just played Bohemian Rhapsody over and over and over and over again. And it became a huge hit. Great story.
Queen is, and of course it might have been different in the UK. Queen was one of these bands that they were popular, but Wayne's World when Wayne's World played Bohemian Rhapsody, this is probably 1990, 91 when Wayne's World came out. The song was originally released like in 75 or 76. Right. And it had some success, but at least in the US, when it was re-released on Wayne's World, it was massive. I think it might have gone to number one.
Definitely, yeah. I think it went back to number one, yeah.
And Queen was never as big before the 90s, at least in the States. They were never as big in the 70s when they were really at their heyday than they were in the 90s. And then all of a sudden, from like the 90s on, and from the time Freddie died, they've been huge. And right. they've grown in every way throughout the 90s and the 2000s. But I can remember hearing Bicycle Race on the radio thinking that's the weirdest song I've ever heard, you know?
It's a great song.
Oh, it's a great song. And Queen is one of my favorites. They're incredible.
I remember going to, so this is a very niche story, but my wife worked for a company that had links with the Barclays Center here in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. And one day she just kind of like, I guess because she knew they were British, and she just one day she was like, so I can get tickets. Do you want to go see Queen? I was like, fuck yeah, I do. And so I think was it Adam Levine was the lead singer at the time because he was covering it from. But I didn't see Freddie live, but I saw Brian May shred live. Yeah. It was possibly the greatest day of my life. It's, I saw Bohemian Rhapsody live, Brian May shredding it. It was amazing.
And you know what? He did a great job. I mean, he wasn't Freddie Mercury, the singer you just mentioned. His name just escaped me.
Adam Levine.
Adam Lambert.
Sorry, yeah. Adam Levine is someone different.
He's but Adam Lambert, he did a
Adam
great
Levine
job.
Is an actor, I think. He's another
singer. He's in I can't remember.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. Adam Lambert.
But Adam Lambert did a great job. I would love to see Queen. They did a weird little one-off tour with Paul Rodgers.
Yes, I remember that.
And here's the thing. Paul Rodgers and Freddie Mercury, both incredible singers, but completely different singers.
Mm.
And it was weird. I mean, because there were a few
Adam Levine in Maroon 5. Sorry, there we go. I just remembered it. There we go.
I was going to say Train, but no, it's Maroon 5.
Adam Levine, yes. Sorry.
Yeah. But just to see Queen if you got Brian May and Roger Taylor there, I mean, whoever they got, it's still awesome. It's not Freddie, but it's still awesome. I would pay to see that.
I don't know who played bass because I'm pretty sure the bass guitarist refused to play live after Freddie died.
John Deacon didn't want to do it without Freddie. So,
which you got to respect.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, where do we go from here? My gosh. All right. Do you ever dabble into? Because I got into the metal. Into that. Did you ever get into like? Because I'm big into Slipknot. I got into huge Slipknot. That kind of thing. Did you ever dabble into that, or where did your music taste take you?
This will really date me too. So sorry. I am, again, blasphemous. I loved Iron Maiden. I loved Judas Priest.
I was going to say Kiss.
I wouldn't say I loved Kiss. I liked Kiss. I appreciated them. In the 70s, when I was 10 years old, no one was as big as Kiss. So you just, by osmosis, you were a Kiss fan because they were so cool. But when I go back and actually listen to the music, they ain't that great. They had the shtick, they had the marketing thing down, and they're fun. But
their live show is fantastic.
Their live show is it's still incredible.
Oh,
right?
I saw Kiss 3-4 years ago. Amazing.
Oh, see, and I would go see them in a heartbeat. I saw them in.
Well, their retirement tour is probably still going on. It's been going on for 7 years now.
Into the road. Yeah, it's still going on. I saw them in 1990 when they were in their non-makeup period. I saw them in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it was okay. But why would you see Kiss without their makeup?
Yeah, no, you want to see the makeup,
right? Exactly. But anyways, I liked I like the late 70s, and the British stuff, right? What they call the new wave of British heavy metal. That was your Judas Priest and Saxon and Iron Maiden, and even Def Leppard at the beginning was considered that new wave of British heavy metal.
With the one-armed drummer.
Yeah. but I never was into Metallica. Metallica came in. I mean, I appreciate Metallica and they're good, but something changed with Metallica. And I don't mean this to sound derisive, right?
I have my views on Metallica, but finish your point.
It's not just Metallica, but the whole, what I call the Cookie Monster singers, where it went to, there wasn't the melodic. You took a Rob Halford or a Ronnie Dio, those guys could just flat out sing, and then a lot of these newer, really heavy metal guys where the vocals are more like, I wasn't into that. I still wanted to hear melodies. I wanted to hear harmonies. That's why I like a lot of the hair metal that people make fun of. Man, there were some great songs there. And so it's been harder for me to get into some of the harder, heavier, in the late 80s, it was, Anthrax and Megadeth and Metallica. And while I appreciated that, I still would go back to the more melodic stuff. And so Judas Priest, which is one of my favorite bands, they lost me around 85, 86 because they were getting more into the really thrashy speed metal type stuff that I just wasn't into as much.
That's why I think I was always a melodic person, because that's why I got into that Slipknot. So I don't know if Slipknot, Killswitch Engage, another band where yes, they had the whole
exactly,
but they had it was almost you have to listen to it, but they would have that, but then maybe like the chorus, they would just bust out into this like, oh, and it's like it's so like, oh my god, this is amazing. Like, it was so. They had great voices. Like they would scream and yell, but they had great voices. Like, oh my god, this is
and there's Disturbed. Disturbed is
he has an amazing voice. Yeah. That guy. Yeah. But yes, he is very yelly.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I'll have to send you a message. But there was one Killswitch Engage song where it's what I always go back to my dad, where with his fascination with Green Day was he was like, they sing about horrible things, but they make it sound so fun and uplifting. Where I felt Killswitch Engage were the opposite, where they sounded so aggressive and angry, but the lyrics were so beautiful and loving and heart. So I have to send you one, but it's the most lyrically, it's one of the most beautiful love songs I've ever heard, but it sounds so aggressive and emotional. It's such a juxtaposition. I love it.
I will check that out, because I have heard good things about Killswitch Engage, and I just haven't. That's not a band that I've really looked into. And that's so the Slipknot guy. Who's the lead singer in Slipknot?
Corey Taylor. He has an because he did Stone Sour.
Stone Sour, I love.
Yes,
I love that. But I Slipknot, I just never really gravitated towards him, but I thought that the Stone Sour was great.
I think Stone Sour was more of his outlet to be more chill and more melodic. Yeah. For sure. But yeah, some there's. We can go into Slipknot. We could spend another hours on with Slipknot for me. But yeah, there's a couple of songs where it's more acoustic and that he's trying to, I guess, implement into Slipknot. But yeah, it's incredible stuff. Okay, right. Before we wrap up, I guess, so for people who are now going to be hopefully checking out the podcast, what do you have a format, I guess, to your podcast, or do you kind of go into each episode like, this is what I want to talk about?
It's funny you mention that, because that's one of the things that we've kind of bounced back and forth on. First, we kind of started with the idea of every episode we were going to review an album.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just riddled with ADD. I can't do that. I can't commit to do that every time. So right now, to be honest, we're kind of all over the place. And there might be an episode where, hey, we're going to talk about We did Dark Side of the Moon a few episodes ago, and we'll dedicate an episode to one album. But so the last episode, for instance, we talked about Alex Lifeson, who's a guitar player in Rush, and other what we call the texture guitar players that you don't think of them as the great screaming lead guitarists, but they play great rhythm parts, and they're into, we talked about guys like Andy Summers from the Police and the Edge from U2. So sometimes it's a theme, sometimes it's an album. We're kind of all over the place. And if someone makes a recommendation, we'll jump right in if we can do it, and do a show based on a recommendation that we get. So we're kind of loose and flexible.
You're still young.
Yeah, that's right.
Because wait, how many episodes you put out now?
41, 42.
Yeah, we've for Waffle Box, the main Waffle Box show, we've just hit 39, and I think we're just only now kind of finding our flow. So I think
that's part of the fun of it, though, right?
It is.
Hear the shows, find their flow, and I think that's what's cool. And I've just found I'm listening to I listen to podcasts more than I listen to music now. So when I'm in the car, I'm listening to podcasts.
Do you know what I love listening to podcasts when I'm driving somewhere I don't know where I'm going. So I have the GPS going, so it almost feels like it's part of the podcast. So it's like, so yeah, we're going to be talking about this, but by the way, take a left here. Oh, anyway, so it's like, no.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I've had a few opportunities to have other podcasters on and to be on other podcasts. And that's just part of the fun, right? I love pointing people to it. Hey, check out this podcast. That's awesome. It's awesome. It's just been a lot of fun. And I think you're probably the same way. If people listen, lots of people listen, and you have a growing audience, that's just kind of icing on the cake,
It's just a fun time I hang out with, and then hey, people listen. That's awesome.
Perfect. And I think it shows, right? If people know that you're all about making money, I don't think the podcast is as fun.
It sounds like you're trying too hard.
Exactly.
Like I was chatting to a guy. His name's Becker, and he hosts this podcast called the St. Louis Chat Show, and it kind of bounces around, but generally they are talking about things and businesses and restaurants and things all in St. Louis. I have no idea about St. Louis.
Right.
But because they're talking about it with so much passion and how much fun, and they have good camaraderie and good banter and good, I listen to it every week. I have no idea what they're talking about, but it's a fun show because they have that good connection. So I think that's where a lot of people fail when they're starting a podcast. What podcast can I start that's going to make me lots of money? Just talk about what you love. Talk passionately about it, and people will listen eventually. Just keep going.
That's the secret. That's the secret right there. So
beautiful. All right. So before we wrap up, the Classic Guitar Rock podcast. Give the plugs. So, okay, where can they watch, listen, follow you?
Classic Guitar Rock podcast. We're on YouTube. Classic Guitar Rock channel on YouTube. You can look that up. But we're on iHeart. We're on Google. We're on Apple. We're on all the regular platforms.
Napster. Download it.
Yeah, Napster. Yeah. MySpace. You can find us on MySpace.
They're big on MySpace.
Yeah, and so if you're a fan of classic rock, obviously that's the umbrella. But we talk about lots of Gen X related stuff as part of that conversation. So if you're a fan of music, we'd love to have you check us out. And Mike, thanks so much for letting me come on. This has been a blast. It's been a lot of fun. I want to have you on our show, so we'll set something up where you can you can make the case for some 90s and 2000 bands that we should be listening to. I think that would be a great topic. Yeah,
I like it. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, so check him out. Follow at Classic Guitar R1 on Twitter. And if you are checking us out, if you haven't listened to the main Waffle Box, make sure you follow us at Waffle Box Pod on Instagram and Twitter, at enjoy wafflebox.com for all the links. We'll be back on Wednesday for our regular scheduled podcast. When does new episodes of your podcast jump out?
We do them bi-weekly now. Normally on Tuesday nights is when we record.
And so have you got a new episode coming out this Tuesday or next Tuesday?
This Tuesday we're scheduled to record.
Perfect.
So probably on Wednesday we'll drop the new episode.
Right. So this coming Wednesday, double feature, listen to the classic rock guitar podcast and then listen to Waffle Box.
Awesome.
Then that's going to be an amazing Wednesday for you.
Amazing double feature
there.
God.
So amazing.
All right. Awesome.
Yeah, so check this out, and I'm going to be on their podcast talking about 90s rock, and it's going to be awesome.
That'll be awesome. All right, Mike.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. It's an absolute pleasure. We'll see you next time, and for wherever you're listening or watching, it's a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Thanks. Bye-bye.